So the NFL is getting closer to nailing down what the final cap number will be for the 2025 season. Saints got a bit of good news on that. We're going to start talking about different options the Saints can use. Today, we're going to talk about the option of restructuring Derek Carr versus the option of cutting Derek Carr. I'm Tim. Let's talk Saints. So a couple of things we need to talk about before we start getting into the calculator break down cut versus restructure is actually talk about a little bit about cuts and restructures. The only thing that we really need to kind of mention is, and I wanted to bring this up, is June 1st, designated June 1st cut. Just to recap a couple of things here to be clear, when we're talking about a cut, we're going to assume it's pre-June 1st and you get the immediate cap relief. The player is immediately released, free to move on, do whatever. If it's designated post June 1st, nothing really changes for the player. He's free to go sign with anyone he wants because for the team, he is immediately released. He's no longer on the roster. However, the cap relief does not come till June 2nd. So when they say stuff like player X gets designated June 1st release, post June 1st release, and frees up $10 million in cap space, yeah, that happens on June 2nd when that $10 million gets freed up. In the meantime, when the league opens on March 12th, the team still has to get under that cap number. For the Saints right now, it's about $47 million. So regardless if we designate, and you can only do two players, we designate two players post June 1st cut, we still have to shave $47 million off before the league opens on March 12th. And the cap relief we get from those two players doesn't go towards it. We don't get it till June 2nd. Very important distinction. The other thing we're going to be talking about is in restructure is just what's known as a basic or a simple restructure, which is converting base salary and non-prorated bonuses into the veteran minimum salary, which is based on the number of years the players has credited service in the league. So the more years, the higher the veteran minimum, obviously. You're not negotiating any new terms. And if you look at kind of how they break down the four things that are going on restructures, it's about making that conversion so you can spread out the cap hit, and you could even add voided years if you need to, up until 5, I believe, 5 total years of either salary contract and or void years. But the fourth thing we're going to mention is you can negotiate new terms. You don't have to take the existing terms and just basically convert the base salary and non-prorated bonuses. If the player agrees, you can basically, it's almost like a brand new contract in a sense of you've added terms, you've changed terms, you've moved money around. Very similar to changing terms what Derek Carr did last year when he restructured. $10 million signing bonus due last March. Well, they changed the terms. It got deferred till this March. That's the $10 million guaranteed money he's about ready to get, or he actually has earned. He's going to get this year. So wanted to kind of point those two things out before we get into the scenarios we're about ready to get into as far as cutting Derek Carr. What is that going to look like? What do we have to do to make that work? As opposed to restructuring Derek Carr, what are the changes that would happen there? What do we have to do? What is it going to look like? The salary cap for 2025 isn't totally set, but it was announced yesterday that the NFL was, they're anticipating it to have been higher than the projected, somewhere between 270 and 275 million. They're saying somewhere between 279 and roughly 282 million. Good news for the Saints because we just got cap relief without actually doing anything. But I think that 47 million is probably going to be the ballpark number, give or take, that we're going to be working with. And so we're going to take a look at the old over the cap. There's many salary cap simulators out there. This is the one I prefer to use and I'm more familiar with. Will point out one thing as we start working through this, that when you're looking at, and they all seem to have this problem. I read something on Twitter basically regarding this, that these calculators, when you start, they're more or less built to figure out this number, the current year. And when you start getting into additional years, it's going to start throwing some wild numbers up, especially, and this is where it came up, trying to figure out restructuring contracts. It concentrates on the current year, which would be 2025, but it starts struggling trying to put numbers together with players that have multiple years and multiple restructures on it, and then using multiple players under that condition. The Saints fall into every one of those category with the players we're going to talk about. So just pointing out 26 and 27, when you start seeing some crazy high numbers coming up, they're not real. I'll try to give you a bit of a breakdown to give you an estimate about how far they're going to be off, but there's only so much even I can do in this situation. Scenario one, we're looking at moving on from Derek Carr this year for 2025, which is a cut, leaving two options. You're going to cut him right away. You're going to designate it post June 1st. Put a pin in that. We'll get back to it in a second, because you're looking at basically the top 10 players that you're going to have to deal with on this list, and they're top 10 because they are the top 10 highest contracts in the sense of base salary, dead money, cap number, which is what we're really dealing with here. One of them is off the table in Ryan Ramczyk. He's already restructured, did that back in January for his retirement. He already busted his numbers down for 2025 with the restructure to his veteran league minimum, which is 1.255 million. Everything else has been prorated dead money as of his retirement. Kind of put him post June 1st retirement. I think that's more than likely what's going to happen, so they can split his between 2025 and 2026, the dead money that's incoming. Not 100% sure on that. That's just the best guess. But in order to hang on to Derek Carr, and we're going to do simple restructures for everyone, you've pretty much got to restructure everybody between Cam Jordan on this list and Alvin Kamara. That's a total of 8. And what I'm doing here, what it's basically showing you is their base salary and any non-prorated bonuses they may have. That's just all getting boiled into reducing their salary in 2025 to their veteran minimum, depending on how many years they have credited with the league. So if you whack the remaining 8 and restructure all of them, which would be the likely scenario, because it's going to be real hard to find basically 44.636 million, according to my math, of cap space you created by basically creating 44.636 million in additional dead money that you're going to be spreading out through, in every single case, I think through 2028. Now, getting back to these numbers, I think this 69 million is going to be lower because of that 44 million being spread out. I think majority of it on a couple of these players are going to hit next year. But in the greater scheme of things, you've just basically cleared your cap space to enough to cut Derek Carr by doing this. Post June 1st or before June 1st. In my opinion, post June 1st makes no sense in this case. Because if you were to cut him prior to the league start in March, you're actually going to save another 1.326 million and bring that cap space down to roughly 1.2 million left that you've got to clear. You have not designated anyone post June 2nd yet. Clearing the rest of that is not going to be very hard without having to restructure or fool with anybody's contract, because I think there's a fair number of players that fall into the category. And I'm kind of guessing here because I think it'll be about the somewhere around 2 million or so in cap savings when they get cut. But some of the veterans like Foster Moreau, Binky Saunders, definitely Jamal Williams, even though he's only 1.5. I think all the signals have been sent. They're moving on there. Cedric Wilson Jr., um, possibly somebody like John Ridgway may get thrown in there. Ben DiNucci. And you have other options. I think at that point, most of those names are going to be the same, but kind of the ones at the top of the list are going to be the bigger gets in that. You just on those players, roughly another 11 million, almost 12 million, get you 10 million under the cap. Now, one thing real quick we need to point out, the cap is figured out over the top 51 players. So 52 and below aren't counting towards the cap space right now and figuring this out. But every time you cut somebody from the top 51, the next guy up is going to fill in. So in effect, there's going to be a little difference, but you're not even adding $1 million per. So if you have to add 5 players, you're adding less than 5 million, give or take on the math. So you're still reasonably where you want to be, but if you want to cut Carr, it's going to have how you're going to have to do it because you just have too much in base salary, in dead money, in the total cap hits on all those other basically 9 players, one of which ramp check's already been done. So you're down to 8. And you would have to restructure each and every one of them. Restructuring them, since you're spreading that dead money out a little more over what's remaining on their contracts. And in the case of Demario Davis restructuring him, he only really has 1 year left on this year, 2025. Everything else is void years. So just restructuring him is adding more dead money to his void years. He's still, all intents and purposes, unless we rework his deal, give him new terms in some way, shape, or form, he's out in 2025 or 2026. Now, I'm not saying this is what you should do. There are other options buried in here, one of which is like we talked about in the restructure, new terms, one of which would be like Demario. Hey, we want to give you another year. We think you have 2 left. So you'd restructure with new terms. It would get you basically where you kind of are. You're still going to kick out some dead money, but you're not adding dead money. You're totally having to take that whole hit next year in 2026 or designating him a post June 1st cut where you're going to take part of it in 26, June 2nd, 2026, and then the rest of it in 2027. And almost every single player on this list that we're restructuring kind of falls in that category. So the question is, do you want to tie yourself in longer on 8 players to move on from 1? The number we're talking about, and I think we need to keep this in mind, is 44.636 million roughly in dead money you're adding over the next couple of years. Does that make it worth it? I don't really know. But if you want to cut Carr, that's kind of the number you're going to be dealing with. 8 players tied in for more years at 44.636. So the next scenario is basically, well, what if happens if you restructure Carr automatically? Well, we were talking about basically creating more dead money and tying 8 players into definitely 2025. They're not going anywhere, probably into 2026, and in some cases beyond. Well, that's what you're talking about doing with Derek Carr on a restructure, simple restructure. But the numbers change greatly because remember, we talked about 44.636 million between 8 players with multiple years for the most part, for most of them, are creating a bigger hit in, say, like Demario Davis's case, if he doesn't come back next year and just plays out this final year of his contract. Well, in Carr's case, he's going to count for 30.996 million by himself in dead money in a restructure to keep him around 2 years. But as we're going to see, it solves issues, though, and it creates issues in one way, but solves issues in quite a different way. Simple restructure with his base salary and his non-prorated bonus. All of a sudden, you're from 47 million over to 16 million over. A lot more manageable number. Now, regardless of what the Saints are going to do salary cap wise this year, I think all along either a restructure in this case to create cap space money or an extension otherwise, it just kind of sounds like three players they had pegged as wanting to make sure they kind of keep them around for a few more years. And whether you agree with it or not, this just seems to be what they're thinking. And so they would be the three obvious candidates for restructures, but McCoy, Ruiz, and Granderson. And at that point, you restructure those three, 2.1 million, you've cleared your cap space. You're going to not really affect the dead money in the years of the remaining. Again, Ram checks already set in stone, but when it comes to Cam Jordan, Taysom Hill, Tyrann Mathieu, Alvin Kamara, you're basically where you are now. You will be there as soon as you make these moves. They're, in other words, their contract terms, their dead money, nothing associated with it. Nothing has really changed on them, which means it's easier at any point if you want to move on from any of that group this year or next year. It's a lot easier for you to do. The sum total, though, 49.326 million between those four. So you've actually kind of added about a little over 5 million more in dead money that's being spread around four players over multiple years. So again, I can't tell you what the best case scenario is. How do you want to do this? How do the Saints want to do this? That's why a video a while back, and I was telling people, look, this is all numbers. It's all business decision. It's not about emotion. And even in some of the comments, people were being kind of emotional about it. Oh, this guy sucks or whatever. Again, I would not agree or disagree with any of your personal assessment on any of these players, but it doesn't change the math. And that's really what's driving this whole issue. Is the Saints have said it before, I'll say it again. We're in the position we're in now because of their math. Good, bad, or indifferent, their math has gotten us to this point. You want to tie into four players, one of which would be Carr on a restructure to be able to move on from the other four? Or do you want to tie in the eight to be able to move on from one? And ultimately, you're winding up in the same place. 2, 3, 4 million under the cap, just so you can not incur the wrath of the NFL and incur fines and loss of draft picks for being over the cap when the league opens on March 12th. So before we wrap things up and sign off, just real quick, more staff additions hitting as I'm recording this Thursday afternoon. Doug Nussmeier, reports are it's about as official as it can be official without the Saints coming out saying, hey, yes, we've hired Doug Nussmeier as the offensive coordinator. Sounds like that's going to be a done deal, likely by tomorrow. They also hired away Ted Spade, who was the director of sports science or the Eagles, bringing him over to do the same job here for the Saints. So yet another Eagle, one of those, supposedly young, up and coming hotshot staff members from the Eagles. We're getting another one coming over with Kellen Moore. And one I'm very happy to hear that this was rumored, but Phil Galliano, who was the assistant special teams coach that Rizzi brought in when Rizzi was named interim, so he could kind of turn the special teams over to Galliano. Galliano was still in the building. He's been promoted officially as the special teams coordinator. Very happy to hear that because it sounds like he's a well-deserved guy and that he did a really great job. Basically, as the interim special teams coordinator once Rizzi was promoted to interim head coach. So probably by the time you see this video Friday morning, there may be more additions adding in there, but it seems like the staff's rounding out. Still hadn't heard anything much on the defensive side, but I was expecting it by tomorrow, Friday. May not happen by then, but I would think over the weekend we'll definitely start getting some indications about what's going on there. So before I go, just to remind everybody, if you want some black and gold merchandise, Go to the Black and Gold Network, myshopify.com. Right now, still have an ongoing 19% discount, celebrating that Kellen Moore is the 19th head coach of the New Orleans Saints. So discount code, his name, Moore, with the number 19 behind it. More 19 gets you the 19% discount. Leave you with that one. Drop them in the comments. Let me know. Yeah, how does it shake out for you? And when you're talking about having to shave $47 million off worth of salary off so you can get under the cap on March 12th, who stays, who goes in your mind? So it ought to be an interesting discussion. And again, yeah, you can tell me so and so sucks and this guy sucks and we got to move on. In an ideal world where you wouldn't have all this cap issues, you could make it happen like that. Unfortunately, we can't. It is all about the math. So I did not do, and I will do, because I'm sure we're going to be revisiting these scenarios, whether it's about Carr or another player in the future. But at some point, I have a feeling we're going to be working in stuff where instead of just the basic restructure we're talking about, where a little more complicated restructure, where terms are changed, money's changed, maybe added, that sort of thing. We didn't delve into any of that because that's a whole nother level, but I'm sure we will at some point. So till I see you next time, I'm Tim. Peace out and who dat.